When cloud security fails, it's rarely because of a single mistake. More often, it's the accumulation of small issues, misconfigurations, access drift, and governance gaps that quietly create risk over time. In this discussion, we're looking at where cloud security really breaks, why these problems persist even in mature SaaS environments, and how teams can address security debt without slowing development. When you look at cloud security incidents, where do things most commonly break down?
I think one of the more common themes that we're seeing, and I like looking at the user / the people part of this, is overprivileged service accounts, people with too much power. So anything that's created for pipelines or integrations, it's often overlooked about giving admin rights on a temporary basis, and they don't get reviewed. And that is such a security gap, and unnoticed. We've always talked a lot about shadow IT. You then start talking about shadow DevOps, which is a completely new concept. But, I've seen production incidents where a compromised CI/CD token, it had global admin in the Azure ID because someone needed to test user provisioning, but it was set up 3 years ago. Now, if someone did, God forbid, get access, break in, they get access to that key.
Sam, do you have any comments to follow on?
I actually see it from a slightly different perspective working with businesses when I do kind of cloud adoption framework workshops with them, in the sense that it's not just about setting up access control, but it's also kind of creating uniformity across your estate. Effectively, it's creating that cloud center of excellence so that everybody within the team knows their roles and responsibilities, and that you're not kind of giving them undue permissions. But I guess also at the same time making sure that where possible you can automate things in a sensible fashion and not just rely on manual deployments, which may actually allow errors to creep in.
Why do these issues persist even in mature cloud organizations?
I think it's the speed of which things happen, or velocity. It's kind of overriding the visibility. DevOps prioritizes around deployment, the speed, and things like security views. They're seen as a pain. They're seen as, okay, we need to get this product out. We need to get it to market. And it is effectively what's making that company money. And they'll spin up new SaaS integrations. They'll connect APIs. They'll be deploying infrastructure as a code without doing any of the legwork, looking at things like security gateways. And the technical debt, if you like, compounds faster than the security teams can actually audit. And immediately what you're looking at is a resourcing problem. So you then, if you do get, let's say, again, I love worst case scenario. I'm sorry, it's just the way my brain works. You get breached and immediately going, okay, well, I'm pulling a dev team or those specialists away from developing the product into fixing security gaps or a problem that was probably there ages ago, but because we're so focused on the product, we've missed it.
There's so many demands now on company time that time and budget is kind of spread quite thinly across lots of different areas. But I guess the other side that I also see is it's very much a process issue. So processes that were there and were true in the original kind of setup, people leave or things change, or sometimes even people move roles, and it's actually just making sure that the access that they had whilst they were doing that role is either removed, adjusted, or upgraded, but to actually fit the role that they do. And there's ways that you can do this, quite neatly through automation. So, like, for example, Microsoft Entra gives you the ability of actually doing access reviews and checking that, on a cadence of your choosing. But it's actually just making sure that you put that process in place. And actually what we see quite a lot of the time is partners going, okay, I just need to adopt an agent because I need to add value to my clients. But actually, they don't always tick the box of how do I manage to make sure that agent isn't doing something it shouldn't do. So we are actually starting to see the increase now of businesses starting to do things like red teaming just to make sure and sanity check those AI agents to make sure that there is actually good practice under the hood.
What are the early warning signs that a team is accumulating security debt?
I guess it would kind of come down to, has the business got a solid foundation? Has it got documentation to back up those processes? If it doesn't, then that's, for me, a big warning sign that maybe things aren't the way they should be. And so I think understanding how you fit in with those kind of general best practices is a really good starting place to see whether or not you're accumulating. What happens if security fails? And that's sometimes something that we also don't look at. And that can be sometimes something to suggest we're accumulating security debt, because the best systems in the world may still fail at times. I guess the other side of it is actually making sure that configuration between different environments. I see it quite often where some of the kind of configurations and setups in a production environment is very, very strong. I do then sometimes see the flip side of it in the development side of it, where people are like, oh, well, it's just a test, it'll be fine. But they forget that actually those test environments still connect and they can still present a risk.
And Scott, do you have anything to add on top of that?
I think sometimes it's a lack of ownership for things like shared services. So who owns the Azure AD tenant configuration? Who's responsible for the API gateway security controls? Sometimes the answer is IT owns it, or maybe the platform team, maybe it's the dev team. And then the critical security infrastructure has no accountability when things do inevitably break down. It's not just things like marketing using Canva, it's anything using OAuth from an application point of view. All permissions that engineering just got approved because they're for testing. And breaking changes down because of security downgrades. I've seen and heard things, teams disabling MFA because legacy applications can't authenticate properly and it's causing a bottleneck.
If you don't understand who is actually owning specific tasks, and security very much should be at the top of that, it's really difficult to actually make sure that those are kept on top of. And actually having that cloud center of excellence team is really, really pivotal, we find. It's actually vocalizing what you find in the environment, whether that's proactively hunting for it or actually something that's reactively happened, and warning people and making sure that people are up to date on these sorts of things. And again, if they don't have a team in place to do that, and we don't have to have a huge team for this, then that could be a clear sign that there's some kind of security debt in place, because we're not even covering the basics.
How can teams address these vulnerabilities without slowing development or modernization efforts?
Security is a multi-layered product. Whilst, really, really love what Microsoft have done around things like the Defender piece and what they've done around DevOps, but I think third-party tools are often underestimated.
It's actually utilizing the right tool for the job, right? So, not every solution needs a hammer. Sometimes you might need a screwdriver. So it's about understanding what's required. And the interesting thing for me, and Scott kind of joked about it earlier, is that, whilst I would love everything to be Microsoft, I do recognize the need for other tooling. And actually, it's understanding what the strength of each one of those tools, actually is. So complementing it. So, you might put in place, for example, defense at depth by making sure you've got, your perimeter covered off with firewalls, making sure that your networking is segmented properly, making sure that there's monitoring in place using tools like Defender and Azure Monitor. But the other side of that is, well, what happens if that was to all go to pot? How do we actually manage that? So it's actually thinking about, okay, maybe we could do an access review through Entra, or perhaps we can use another tool. So we actually internally use a tool called Surveil to do that, where they actually have got the ability of seeing not just what users have access to, but also applications. And there's a big sort of red flag for a lot of people still, where they don't treat applications with least privileged access. So having that in place can be really, really important. And then, even going a step further, as I kind of alluded to in one of the previous questions, it's, if it all goes wrong, how do we recover? And that should be as much a part of your security setup as well, to avoid slowing down. I know we're talking development here, but actually that could easily be, applied to your production environment as well. So using tools like, for example, Acronis, where they can actually do malware scanning on backups and things like that prior to being ingested. Having not all your eggs in the Microsoft basket, so to speak, is a sensible option, but then still making sure that you're utilizing those native technologies. So I would say that it's understanding the right tool for the job and making sure that you've got a comprehensive, documented flow of how your environment is going to look yesterday, today, tomorrow, and actually who's responsible for that. And that's the way to actually make sure you don't slow down any development, you just keep rapidly improving.
What's one practical lesson you wish more engineering leaders took on board?
Always assume you're under attack. Assume breach, verify every access request, and making that mental model change, and it means your security decisions become clearer. Ultimately, zero trust architecture shouldn't be a buzzword, and it isn't these days. It's an operational requirement now for cloud native infrastructure. Automate your testing, automate improvement where you can, apply it to your code. Because in a cloud environment, it's just as critical.
It's just making sure that you have that security by default at every stage of the process. So not just doing it in production, not just doing it in staging, but also doing it in development. So that's why I would say security by default. Use the tooling that's available to you. If you're not sure on what that is, reach out to somebody and find out, because it could cause a problem later down the line if you don't.